Welcome back to Sip&Talk. I'm Joe.
And I'm Sunny. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world.
Welcome. In our last Sip&Talk, we kind of went down this rabbit hole about whether the CCP's logic meant they basically gifted Taiwan to Japan. And our DMs just completely exploded.
They really did. I thought it was, just a deep cut for the history nerds out there, but you all were way more fired up than I was, especially with that one follow-up question.
Oh, another one. Hey, so by that logic, does that mean Hong Kong might actually belong to Taiwan?
Yes. I honestly laughed out loud when I first read that, just spilled my coffee. But then you start thinking about it and you realize Beijing's own narrative, their own logic, kind of leads you down that ridiculous path.
It totally does. Because they're doing all these things at once.
Right. On one hand, they reject the San Francisco Peace Treaty, then they turn around and just ignore the 50 years unchanged promise for Hong Kong.
And at the same time, they're twisting UN Resolution 2758 into something it was never meant to be. And then the real kicker is telling everyone that the 1984 Sino-British Joint Declaration is just a historical document with no binding force.
But that's not how international law works. You can't just say, oh, that thing I signed, yeah, that's just history now.
And that creates the paradox that you all spotted. If Beijing's current story is the one we're supposed to believe, then the whole handover.
Wait, let me jump in here. The core idea is this. In 1984, the UK was dealing with the transfer of Hong Kong. If you look at the international context at the time, some would argue the legitimate entity was the Republic of China. So was the UK technically handing it over to that legacy, only for the PRC to come in and rewrite history to say, no, it was always coming to us?
That's the logical trap they set for themselves. It's their classic move, what we could call the unilateral history downgraded editing mode.
So today, we're asking the absurd question that you all put in our heads. If the CCP can just negate international contracts, historical documents, and the original signatories,
then how did Hong Kong's sovereignty legitimately get into their hands in the first place?
Right. Was it really a return to the motherland? Or, was it just stolen?
Today, we're going to unpack that whole logical mess. We'll start with the San Francisco Treaty, the Cairo Declaration, the Joint Declaration, UN resolutions, and we're going to find all the loopholes.
And trust me, there are loopholes big enough to sail a ship through Victoria Harbor.
Okay, so let's get into it. The place to start has to be the legal foundations. The very documents that Beijing has tried so hard to undermine or just completely redefine over the years.
We're looking at, 3 key documents and one really big political move.
Exactly. And first up is the San Francisco Peace Treaty, or the SFAT, as it's sometimes called.
The SFAT.
This was signed back in 1951. It was supposed to be the document that settled everything after World War II in Asia. All the major allied powers were there. Japan was there. It was a big deal.
Sounds straightforward, but I have a feeling it's anything but.
Oh, it's the source of so much of the ambiguity we're still dealing with. Because the specifics are, they're everything.
So what did it actually say about places like Hong Kong or Taiwan?
See, that's the thing. Japan simply stated it was abandoning all its rights and claims to these territories. So Taiwan, Penghu, the South China Sea Islands, they just walked away.
Abandoning, not transferring.
Precisely. And here's the crucial legal gap, the omission that changed everything.
Yeah.
The treaty did not explicitly name who was supposed to receive these territories.
Wait, really? It's like they packed up a house and just left the keys on the counter without saying who the new owner is.
But that is a perfect analogy. It created this black hole of sovereignty. Was it supposed to go to the ROC, the Republic of China, which was the wartime ally?
Yeah.
Or the PRC, the People's Republic, which was brand new? By 51, the world was split on who to even recognize.
And I'm guessing that ambiguity is exactly what Beijing needed. It gives them the perfect excuse to just throw the whole treaty out.
That's their move. They reject the SFAT completely. They call it illegal, invalid, and their argument for that has a couple of parts.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is the moral argument. They say Hong Kong was stolen from China by Britain through, quote, unequal treaties, like the Treaty of Nanjing.
Right, the century of humiliation narrative.
Exactly. So in their view, it was always Chinese land just waiting to be returned. Any post-war treaty deciding its fate was, irrelevant. It was a domestic issue, not an international one.
Okay, that's the moral case. What's the legal one?
The legal argument is a bit more technical. They use a principle called res inter alio acta.
You're going to have to translate that for me.
It's just a fancy Latin way of saying a treaty doesn't bind anyone who didn't sign it.
And since the PRC wasn't invited to San Francisco in 1951.
Right. The ROC was the one invited to represent China by the U.S. and others. So the PRC says, we weren't there, we didn't sign it, so it has absolutely no legal effect on us.
So they're using an international legal concept to justify ignoring a foundational international treaty. That's some serious legal gymnastics.
It is, and it's an incredibly powerful narrative for their domestic audience because it lets them bypass the entire post-war legal system and frame everything Hong Kong, Taiwan as just a matter of national destiny.
But hang on, if their logic is, we didn't sign it, so it doesn't count, doesn't that open a huge door for the ROC? I mean, they were there. They were recognized as the government of China by the U.S. and others until the 70s.
It absolutely does. And that's the alternative view, the one that supporters of the ROC would champion. They argue that since the ROC fought Japan as an ally, all those rights that Japan abandoned should have legally reverted to them.
So, legally speaking, they had a pretty strong claim.
A very strong claim. There was even a separate treaty later, the Treaty of Taipei in 1952, between Japan and the ROC to settle their own peace terms. So the whole situation is legally very messy.
So by rejecting the SF8, the PRC basically builds a legal firewall. It lets them avoid ever having to engage with the ROC's historical legitimacy.
That's it, exactly. It's a calculated move.
Okay.
And it sets the stage perfectly for their next big play, which didn't happen on a battlefield or at a treaty table, but in the halls of the United Nations.
The UN maneuver of 1972. This is the part of the story that just feels, I mean, if you were a Hong Konger back then, this must have felt like a massive betrayal.
Devastating.
Yeah.
You have to understand the context. In 1960, the UN General Assembly passed Resolution 1514.
And what was that?
It was a landmark resolution. It confirmed that all colonial peoples have a fundamental right to self-determination. It was the legal engine for decolonization all over the world.
So Hong Kong was a British colony. Theoretically, its people were covered by 1514. They should have had the right to choose their future independence, staying with Britain, joining China.
A referendum, right?
That was the legal status it held. But then came 1971. The PRC replaced the ROC at the UN. And that changed everything.
And they didn't waste any time. Not a minute. They immediately went to the UN and demanded that Hong Kong and Macau be taken off the official list of colonial territories.
If they're not on the list, they're not protected by the resolution.
Exactly. Taking them off the list would instantly strip them of that right to self-determination. It was an audacious political move.
And it actually worked.
It worked. In 1972, the General Assembly passed Resolution 2908, which approved the removal. Just like that, the legal status of millions of people was changed.
Okay, but hold on. Why? Where were the UK and the US? If they were supposedly the champions of democracy and self-determination, why didn't they block this? Why not at least put up a fight?
That is the million-dollar question, and the answer is pure, uncut, realpolitik.
Power politics.
Yep. First, you have the U.S. This is the era of Nixon and Kissinger. They were deep in the process of opening up relations with the PRC to counterbalance the Soviet Union.
So the fate of a small colony was less important than the Cold War chess game.
Way less important. Then you have the UK. They knew the lease on the new territories, which was like 92% of Hong Kong's land, was set to expire in 1997. They had no real military will to defend the place.
So they chose not to antagonize Beijing?
They offered almost no resistance. They were already thinking about future trade and diplomatic ties. So they effectively traded away the right to self-determination for a smoother relationship down the road.
That's a rough trade.
It is. And the PRC's framing was brilliant. They argued Hong Kong wasn't a colony in the traditional sense. It was Chinese territory occupied by a foreign power.
Subtle difference in words, but a huge difference in meaning.
A world of difference. It changed the entire conversation from decolonization to territorial recovery. And once it's about recovering your own territory, the people living there don't get a vote.
Just look at other places like Gibraltar or the Falklands. They got to have referendums because they kept that colony status.
And they voted to stay with the UK. Hong Kongers lost that choice entirely in 1972. It's not just critics who say this either.
Oh.
Former British diplomats have gone on record saying that if the PRC hadn't made that move, the UK would have been legally obligated under Resolution 1514 to promote self-determination in Hong Kong. Options other than just a handover to Beijing would have been on the table.
So by knocking out that option early, the PRC basically guaranteed that any future negotiation would be just between them and the UK.
Exactly. Set the stage for the 1980s and the next critical document, the Sino-British Joint Declaration.
The one that was supposed to be the great international guarantee, the promise of one country, two systems.
The promise that Hong Kong's way of life, its capitalist system, would remain 50 years unchanged.
I remember at the time it was praised as this brilliant piece of diplomacy, a peaceful solution.
It was. But it's also the contract that Beijing later decided was, well, disposable. Starting around 2017, their foreign ministry just started publicly calling it a historical document.
With no realistic significance and no binding force. I mean, that's an incredible thing to say about a treaty you signed.
It is. It's like if you signed a 50-year mortgage on your house, and 30 years in, you just tell a bank, you know what, that contract is just a historical document now. It's not really binding.
Yeah, you'd be out on the street in a week.
And that's the difference between domestic law and the Wild West of international relations. Because the Joint Declaration isn't just some policy paper. It's a UN-registered international treaty, registration number 23391.
And being registered with the UN, what does that mean legally?
It means it's governed by the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, the VCLT. This is basically the rule book for how countries make and keep promises to each other.
And what's rule number 1?
Rule number 1 has a great Latin name, pacta sunt servanda.
Agreements must be kept.
Agreements must be kept. Under the VCLT, you can't just decide a treaty is over, especially not one that was designed specifically to manage a transfer of sovereignty. Its obligations don't just vanish.
And the UK certainly hasn't agreed that it's over.
Far from it. The UK, and pretty much the entire international legal community, maintains that it is a legally binding treaty, fully in effect until the year 2047. That's why the British government still issues reports to their parliament twice a year on the situation in Hong Kong.
They're using the Joint Declaration as the yardstick.
To measure Beijing's compliance. So when Beijing unilaterally says it's just a historical document, that's not seen as just political spin. In Western capitals, it's seen as a direct breach of contract, a violation of international law.
It's a massive hit to their credibility, their international credit score, if you will.
It's the biggest hit, because it sends a message to every other country. If you sign a long-term deal with the PRC, their signature might just expire whenever it becomes inconvenient for them.
Okay, so we've laid out the legal mess. Beijing rejects the post-war treaty system when it's inconvenient, but then uses its political power to change the rules at the UN, and then ignores the very treaty they signed to get Hong Kong.
A good summary.
So let's circle all the way back to that listener question that started this. Was the UK supposed to hand Hong Kong to the ROC in Taipei?
Right. Let's do the fact check.
What's the verdict?
Historically speaking, no. The UK never planned to transfer sovereignty to the ROC.
And the reason is just pure pragmatism.
100%.
Yeah.
By 1950, just after the POC was founded, the UK had already switched its diplomatic recognition to Beijing. So when the 80s rolled around and it was time to negotiate, they had to talk to the government that actually controlled the mainland.
The government that controlled the water supply and the land that the new territories lease was on?
Exactly. Hong Kong was not viable on its own. The UK had to deal with the political reality on the ground, and that reality was the PRC.
So the core of the argument isn't that the UK gave Hong Kong to the wrong China?
No. The core of the manipulation is that the PRC, through that 1972 UN move, made sure there were no other options on the table. They eliminated the ROC as a competitor, and more importantly, they eliminated the Hong Kong people themselves as a third option.
They forced the UK's hand, ensuring it could only be a bilateral deal between London and Beijing.
That's the real story. The handover was always going to be to the PRC because of the political reality, but the PRC shaped that reality through some very clever and some would say ruthless political and legal maneuvering years in advance.
Fascinating. So, okay. We have a rejected treaty, we have a political power play that stripped millions of their right to self-determination, and we have a major international agreement just being declared null and void. Given all of that, why does the rest of the world mostly just, shrug and treat Hong Kong as China's internal business?
The answer is 2 words, and they're cold and hard. Realpolitik.
Realpolitik.
Yeah.
Power politics. The idea that morality and law take a backseat to national interest and strength.
It is. It's policy based on practical reality, not ideals. And the international community's approach to anything involving the PRC and ROC is based entirely on acknowledging the political reality on the ground.
And that reality is that the PRC controls a continent, has a massive army, and is the world's factory.
Precisely. You can't ignore the world's second largest economy. You can't ignore its military might. You can't ignore its influence through things like the Belt and Road Initiative.
So when governments choose this path, they're basically prioritizing things like stable supply chains and access to 1 billion consumers over things like, historical justice or democratic principles.
That's the trade-off. It's the reason most of the world, including the U.S. back in 1979, shifted diplomatic recognition from Taipei to Beijing. It wasn't an endorsement of the CCP's historical claims. It was a cold calculation about power and influence in the world.
And you can see this play out in how differently the world treats Hong Kong versus how it treats Taiwan.
Oh, it's a night and day difference. With Hong Kong, the narrative is basically that the story is over.
The transfer is done.
Right. There's a lot of international criticism, sure, sanctions on a few officials, strongly worded statements. But no one is seriously calling for UN intervention to restore the joint declaration. It's treated as a sovereign internal matter for China.
A sad chapter, but a closed one.
Exactly. Whereas Taiwan is treated with maximum strategic ambiguity. The U.S. sells them billions in advanced weapons, but deliberately refuses to formally recognize their sovereignty.
The balancing act.
It's all about preventing a war that would absolutely wreck the global economy. Taiwan's fate is a global stability issue. Hong Kong's fate was treated more like a localized human rights crisis.
Tragic, but not worth risking a major conflict over.
That's the brutal calculation of realpolitik. And it gets criticized heavily for rewarding authoritarian behavior and ignoring the very principles the West claims to stand for.
Let's talk about the direct consequences of this strategy in Hong Kong, because it's not abstract anymore. We're talking about a fundamental change in a way of life for millions.
The change has been staggering. You saw the warning signs with the 2014 umbrella movement and then the massive protests in 2019. Those were cries from the city that they did not want their system to be dismantled.
And the response from Beijing was not to listen, but to tighten the screws.
To tighten them all the way. The national security law in 2020 was the final nail in the coffin for one country, two systems, as it was originally understood.
And the results are plain to see. Freedom of speech is gone. Newspapers have been shut down. The electoral system has been rewritten to ensure only patriots can run.
And mass arrests of almost every prominent democratic figure, politician, journalist, you name it. The promises of the joint declaration are, for all practical purposes, dead.
And the main international response, beyond words, has been to open an escape hatch.
Yes. The most significant practical response was from the UK, expanding their British National Overseas, or BNO, passport scheme.
It's basically offering a path to citizenship for millions of Hong Kongers.
It's a migration pathway. It's not a challenge to Beijing's sovereignty, but it is an acknowledgement that the treaty was broken and an attempt to, mitigate the human cost.
And from Taipei's perspective, watching all of this unfold must have been like watching a horror movie where you know you're next.
Absolutely. The ROC sees this as the PRC successfully stealing a piece of historical legacy that arguably they had a stronger claim to. But more than that, it was a terrifying preview of what one country, two systems actually means in practice.
So, to sum this part up, Beijing got what it wanted in Hong Kong through pure power politics, but the price was its international credibility, a price they were clearly willing to pay.
Okay, so now we get to the fun part. We take the very questionable logic that Beijing used for Hong Kong, that mix of cherry-pick history and political force, and we try to apply it to their claim over Taiwan.
And this is where the whole argument just completely falls apart, right?
Right.
Because a former colony and a self-governing democracy are two very, very different things.
They are worlds apart. But Beijing tries to pretend they're the same. They present their claim on Taiwan as just a natural extension of the Hong Kong model, all under the umbrella of the One China principle.
Let's break down their official argument, the A side of the debate. What are their three main justifications?
Okay, so justification number one is the historical basis. They point to wartime documents, like the Cairo Declaration from 1943, which said territories Japan stole from China, like Taiwan, should be returned.
So a claim based on historical inheritance.
Right. Justification number two is political succession. This is the key. They claim that the PRC is the only legitimate successor to all of China's historical territory. So in their eyes, when the Cairo Declaration said China, it now means the PRC.
And the third justification is basically a threat.
It's the legal threat, yeah.
Okay.
The 2005 anti-secession law. It's a piece of domestic PRC law that says they can use non-peaceful means, meaning military force, if Taiwan moves towards formal independence. It's their attempt to legally frame an invasion as an internal affair.
Okay, that's their neat, tidy official story. Now let's get to the B side, the logic breakdowns. Where does it all go wrong?
The first and biggest breakdown is doubt number one. the failure of effective rule.
This one's simple. The PRC has never, not for a single second, actually governed Taiwan.
And in international law, that is a huge deal. A sovereignty claim is massively strengthened if you can show you have effective control over a territory. Can you collect taxes, enforce laws, defend the borders?
Taiwan's government does all of those things. It has for over 70 years.
Right. It has its own military, its own currency, its own constitution, its own democratically elected government. This isn't a colony or an occupied territory. It's a fully functioning, self-governing state.
So claiming it's an internal affair when you have zero actual control is a bit of a stretch.
It's legally very, very weak. It's less a legal claim and more a statement of ambition.
Then there's doubt number 2, ignoring self-determination and democratic reality.
This is maybe the most powerful counterargument. Taiwan isn't just self-governing. It's a vibrant, mature democracy. And the people there have made their feelings very clear.
They do not want to be part of the PRC, especially not after watching what happened to Hong Kong.
Absolutely. Public opinion polls consistently show overwhelming opposition to unification under Beijing's model. So, when you assert a historical claim from 80 years ago against the expressed democratic will of 23 million people today,
you're putting yourself on the wrong side of modern principles like self-determination.
You are. And that's why the U.S. and Japan are always so careful with their language. They say any change to the status quo must be peaceful and agreed upon by both parties.
Both parties, that's the key phrase. It's international code for this is not just your internal business.
Precisely. And that brings us to doubt number 3, the self-contradiction and credibility crisis.
This is the flip-flop, where they pick and choose which rules and which history applies to them.
It's a massive flip-flop. Look at their legal methods. For Hong Kong, they take a modern, specific, UN-registered treaty that they themselves signed, the Joint Declaration, and they call it a meaningless historic file.
They just toss it in the trash. But for Taiwan,
they cling to vague, decades-old wartime declarations like Cairo, which wasn't even a formal treaty, and they treat it as absolute, ironclad legal proof of ownership.
So modern binding treaties are disposable, but old non-binding declarations are sacred.
When it suits them, yes. And that's why their credibility is shot. Why would Taiwan ever trust any promise of peaceful unification when they saw what happened to the promises made to Hong Kong?
It's an impossible sell. And that leads to this idea you brought up, the living father analogy.
I think this is the easiest way to understand the core legal problem for Beijing. Their entire claim depends on the idea that the Republic of China, the ROC, is legally dead.
If the ROC is dead, then the PRC, as the successor state, gets to inherit all its stuff, including Taiwan.
Exactly. It's like trying to claim your inheritance. But the problem is...
My father isn't dead. He just moved across the street and is doing fine.
He's alive and well. The ROC government didn't dissolve in 1949. It retreated to Taiwan and continued to function. This isn't a case of state succession where one state disappears. It's an unresolved civil war that resulted in 2 separate functioning governments.
So because the ROC survived, the PRC's claim isn't one of legal inheritance, it's a claim for military conquest.
That's the heart of it, and this living father problem is why U.S. policy is so deliberately ambiguous. They have the One China policy, where they acknowledge Beijing's claim over Taiwan.
But they don't accept or endorse it.
That subtle difference in words is everything. It leaves the door open for the current reality, a democratically governed Taiwan, to continue existing indefinitely. It prevents either side from trying to settle the issue by force.
So in the end, the power politics that work for them in Hong Kong just doesn't work for Taiwan.
It fails completely because Taiwan has effective rule, a democratic mandate, and the strategic backing of major world powers on its side.
Okay, so let's zoom out. We've really pulled apart the logical pretzel at the heart of Beijing's foreign policy.
We have. For Hong Kong, they used some very shrewd political moves, especially at the UN, to corner the UK and frame it as a simple territorial recovery. But that victory cost them dearly in terms of international credibility when they tore up the Joint Declaration.
And then we showed how that same logic, that same playbook, just completely breaks down when you try to apply it to Taiwan.
It fails because Taiwan is protected by principles that Hong Kong wasn't: effective self-rule and the democratic will of its people.
I think the core takeaway here is that Beijing's argument is this closed loop. It's a self-referential story about historical inheritance that only works if you accept their first premise.
Which is that their political power is more important than international law and that the Republic of China basically doesn't exist.
But that whole narrative just shatters when it hits two modern realities.
The first reality is the democratic will of the Taiwanese people who just do not consent to be governed by them. And the second reality is the PRC's own track record of broken promises in Hong Kong.
They destroy their own credibility.
Utterly. And when a major world power shows that it's willing to just unilaterally edit or cancel its promises, the whole world has to recalibrate. The fight over Taiwan's future has stopped being a dusty historical argument.
It's become a frontline conflict between democracy and authoritarianism.
It has. And that leads us to one last, pretty provocative thought for you to chew on.
Let's hear it.
Okay, so consider this. Beijing was willing to take a UN-registered international treaty, the Sino-British Joint Declaration, and just declare it a non-binding historical document.
Yeah.
What other major international agreements that are currently in effect on trade, on finance, on climate change, might they be getting ready to unilaterally tear up next?
Because if a treaty that guaranteed the future of a global financial hub can just be thrown away like an old newspaper, what does that mean for global stability? What does it mean for the trust that all of our international systems are built on?
That's the question to really mull over.
Yeah.
It forces us to think critically and not just take these legal narratives at face value.
It really does. Thank you so much for joining us on this Sip and Talk. If you enjoyed this conversation, please hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening. We want to keep diving into these fascinating, complex topics with you.
Hey, before we sign off, a quick shout out to our friend Micky and his YouTube channel, Micky to Life.
Yes.
He's working so hard on those European vlogs. He's got a lot of fun stuff, great travel tips. He's exploring the continent. Go support that guy.
Seriously, go hit the like button. Tell him we sent you. Haha, he's working hard. We're rooting for him.
We hope today's discussion was objective, based on the facts, and helps you keep thinking for yourself.
We'll see you next time.